Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Looking forward to this session. Um, I can't see anybody. Is this how it's supposed to work?
Yes, yes. You will just see the questions on the right.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So look, this is about my book Fear Forward. The webinar is called Fear Forward, and what I basically want you to understand is that, and it sounds obvious, you're never going to move forward in life unless you face your fears. Everyone knows that. But most people don't realize that to make the greatest forward progress in life, you got to face your greatest fear. But what do most people do? They face every other thing except that thing that they know will, grant them that giant quantum leap forward. So what I want you to understand is what we've been taught about fear is completely inaccurate. It's not only antiquated, but it's inaccurate. See, you can't actually fear the unknown. We're taught that human beings have fear of the unknown, but that is completely false. And you're going to see why. But besides being false, I want to share with you what it costs you to embrace this model and to embrace this paradigm. See, when you believe in fear of the unknown, there's nothing you can do about it. You're always one step behind fear. I mean, imagine you know that to make the greatest forward in your life, the greatest forward progress in, let's say, your business, then you got to overcome the fear of public speaking. You know that, or the fear of networking. So you believe, well, you know what? I got this networking event next week. I have this presentation in a month, and there's nothing I can do about it because I'm afraid of the unknown. You see how fear of the unknown is disempowering? Because you're literally left with nothing to work with. The best thing you can do is feel the fear and do it anyway. But even then, you're still living with and around fear. See, the idea is if you believe in fear of the unknown, then you got to show up on stage. You got to show up at a networking event. You got to show up on a date that you have with someone to know what you're really afraid of, which means you're always one step behind fear. Fear is always one step ahead of you, ready to trip you up. So not only is the fear of the unknown model antiquated, not only is it disempowering, but let me share with you now why it's inaccurate, why it's false. See, fear is an emotion. And like any emotion, there requires a definition, an association, substance in the mind. You can't feel an emotion for no reason, for unknown reasons. Think about it. Imagine your son. I was just talking to a friend the other night, and I said, imagine your son came up to you and said, and had this big smile on his face. And you said, what's with the smile? He's like, Dad, mom said I can go to the mall and have ice cream. So the emotion of, let's say, happy or excited, right, makes sense for that child. For there's a known reason for the emotion. He knows he's going to the mall and he's going to have ice cream. Okay, but let's imagine your daughter, I said to my friend, has a frown on her face. She's, got the smile upside down. And you said to her, hey, what's with the long face? And she said, oh, well, mom said I can't have ice cream at the mall. Can you see how there's an emotion there? Let's call it sadness. And it makes perfect sense. And there's known reasons in the mind. She knows exactly why she has the emotion. So if you have fear, there has to be substance in the mind. There has to be something that you're associating with mentally, right? I know a lot of people that associate success in business with a failed relationship, or success in business with, being, having health complaints. So if we don't fear the unknown, then what do we fear? And I'll just give you a moment to ponder this. And feel free to share the comments in the chat. But the idea is that if you don't fear the unknown, you fear the known. But what is the known? The known is the past. I mean, think about it. That's the only thing you know. The only thing you know right now, or I should say everything you know right now, is happened milliseconds to decades ago, right? You know nothing about what I'm going to say next. You know nothing about what's going to happen next, right? So the known is the past. And what human beings are afraid of is history repeating itself. What we're afraid of is yesterday showing up tomorrow. So we're not afraid of the mystery of tomorrow. You are not afraid of the mystery of tomorrow. You're afraid of the history of yesterday. I want to share with you of how Fear Forward came to life. And I'm going to share with you a powerful story, the most powerful story I know of someone who had an absolutely transformative life after we applied the Fear Forward method to her life, okay, and to her greatest challenge. So I was in Lebanon with my family it was 2022, 2023. And I thought, you know what? It's been 20 years since I've been coaching. I started in 2003. And I thought, maybe it's time to write a book on personal development. I've written a nutrition book, a networking book. And I thought maybe it's time to write a book in the personal development / psychology space. So I started playing around with the acronym FEAR, free energy and run, free energy and react, etc. And then I just kind of tossed it, pushed it to the side. And I just tossed the idea because I thought I didn't really have a lead story. I wasn't really sure where I was going to go with the book. So I visited a chiropractor friend in Lebanon, a dear friend, Haifa. And I said to her, I shared with her a story of a patient that I coached. And let me tell you that story real quick. This patient came to see me a year prior to my trip in Lebanon. It was 2022. In fact, it was a year and a day before I had this conversation with my chiropractor friend. So this patient came in to see me. She had pain, a blocked ear. She was an absolute mess. She's been everywhere, tried everything pretty much. And she wasn't able to really, shake this. I treated her and she was getting temporary results. I said, look, let's go a level deeper. Let's see what's really happening with your lifestyle and specifically her mind. And I said, look, what is your greatest challenge right now? And she said, it's simple. I'm not able to have a child. I've been trying for 10 years. And I said to her, okay, maybe you don't want to have a child. And she said, no, that's not the case. I've tried IVF. I've even felt pregnant several times and miscarried. So no, we're doing everything we can. We're throwing the bank at it, basically. We're doing everything we can. We even have a surrogate, which is so interesting. That's a 21-year-old that, and my husband's completely fine. So they got a surrogate that they're trying to impregnate. Her husband's sperm count's fine. She's doing IVF. She can't seem to carry a baby. So I said, look, I believe you, okay, but let's look at what could be going on at a deeper level, maybe at a subconscious level. And I said, if you were to have a child right now, if I was to snap my fingers and you were to have a child right in this moment, what would be your greatest fear? She paused for a second and said, wow. And I said, what is it? She said, I'm afraid of becoming like my mother. So can you see that she had one foot on the brake, don't have a child, because that would mean I would turn out like my mother, and I'm afraid of that. On the other foot, she's slamming the gas, which is full speed ahead, throwing everything she has at having a baby, all her money, all her time. That's her number one focus in her life. And so she has what I call conflicting fears. And what we did is I made her realize that this is what's basically happening right now. Her past is overactive in the now and is impacting what the results she's looking for in the future. And she wasn't able to she couldn't believe that this was, playing in the background. So she took me back to a moment with her mom when she got into a confrontation with her when she was only 15 years old, approximately. And that led to her leaving the house. She's never looked back. She was the right-hand woman of many CEOs of companies you would know if I shared with you their names. And she traveled Europe, landed in the UAE, met her husband. And I made her kind of just change the story that she had about her past. And it was incredible because all her symptoms dropped off in a matter of 3 to 4 hours of coaching. She couldn't believe the physical results she had. And it was just amazing. She spoke to her mom after many, many years. I mean, they speak, but it's really cold. It's just, how you doing? They haven't met in years. She said, Odi, I spoke to my mom for hours and hours. We cried. I told her how much I loved her. And we decided to see each other. She's coming to visit me. And so I'm now in Lebanon, a year and a day later, sharing this story that you just heard with my chiropractor friend in Lebanon. She said, what an amazing story. You didn't even have to physically touch her anymore. And you were able to get at the root of spinal problems, which the first chiropractor said back in 1895 is autosuggestion, what we suggest to ourselves, self-talk. And she said, but I have a question. I said, what's that? She's like, did she get pregnant? And I said, I'm not sure. It's been so long. She said, hold on a second. What's wrong with you? That's the most important part of the story. And she's right. And I just didn't know because we lost contact. It was, like I said, a year and a day later. Anyways, I went back to the apartment and I was thinking about this book and I was thinking about her story. And then I received a message from her. It was an SMS, WhatsApp. And it wasn't her telling me that, she was pregnant, because that would have been next level miracle kind of stuff. It was better than that. It was her, Jody, sharing with me a picture of her newborn baby. I was covered in goosebumps. I was covered in tears, and I was sobbing like a little baby. I remember sitting next to my wife's sister, and she said to me, "You okay?" And I said, "I'm more than okay. I'm perfect." And yeah, so she faced her greatest fear. She made the greatest progress in her life. And I just imagined myself as I started putting pen to paper to put this book together. I just imagined one day that she, her son would knock on my door and say to me, I'm Jody's son. And I just imagine that this is what's happening to people, is that they're held back in life because of the history of yesterday, right? It's our past experiences and our mental associations with them that's leading us to not be able to walk forward with courage confidently. And it's holding people back. And you know what? This doesn't just apply to physical health and not being able to have a child. Businesses, I know many businesses who, business owners have a fear of failure, of not being able to have their baby come to life and being able to create another branch of their business or whatever it is. But they also have a fear of success. They have a fear of what life would look like if they did hit their targets and all their KPIs, and their business did scale to an unimaginable level. So basically, this is the process that I want you to understand that's happening in your mind. You're not afraid of the unknown. Even if you start with, well, hold on a second. I've never moved to this country before. How can I be afraid of something I've never experienced? Well, it's the known elements in what you perceive to be unknown that's driving the fear process. I'll share with you another story, and then I'll get into the steps that you can apply to get this method working for you instead of against you. I was speaking at a young leaders development program in Dubai many, many years ago. And I was there to speak about how to overcome your fear of public speaking. And it was so interesting because there was about 150 people there, round tables, teenagers. And the table next to me, there was 3 gals in particular that I'll never forget that were sitting there. And the MC of the event, Malih Yaman, a black belt karate instructor, was asking the audience some questions. And it was the same people answering. And he said, you know what, guys, I want someone new to answer this time. So I'm going to just walk up to a random person. So he walked up to the table next to me and he handed the mic and he asked a question, handed the mic to one of the girls, and she nodded her head, looked away. She did not want to answer. And he's like, oh, so you're afraid of public speaking? Okay, well, if you don't speak up now, it's not going to just go away on its own. So he pointed to the next girl. She also didn't want to speak. And the third girl. Anyway, he called for a break. And during the break, I decided to, mosey on over to that table. And I asked the three gals, and I said, clearly you guys didn't want to take the opportunity to speak. And they said, yeah. And I said, do you mind if I kind of poke and probe as to see what's going on under the hood? And they said, sure. I told them that I'd be speaking next on, how to overcome your fear of speaking, but I can coach you a little bit. And they said, sure. So I said, let me ask you something. What are you afraid of? Why didn't you just take the mic and go speak? And the one gal said, Tamara, I don't know. I'm not really sure. I said, oh, so it's a simple case of fear of the unknown, right? And she's like, yeah. And I said, well, you can't actually fear the unknown. There's something you have certainty about that's in your mind that you're afraid of repeating. And she was a clever gal. She said to me, hold on a second. So you're saying that I have fear of the unknown. You're saying that I'm afraid of history repeating, but how can I be afraid of something repeating if I've never spoken before, frankly? And I said, that's because you think that you have to be speaking on in front of a large room with 150 people and a microphone in your hand. And that's not necessarily the case. The reason why you're afraid could come from some event that doesn't involve you speaking to a large audience with a mic in your hand. And so we probed deeper and we found what I call her source incident. It actually started when she was in class, in school, and she was asked by the teacher to answer something. She stood up and she had broken English and the whole class laughed at her. It was that simple. And that's what she was afraid of repeating. Because when I said to her, is that what you're afraid of going down if you were to speak up? She said, exactly. When I asked the girl next to her, she said, well, I had an event that occurred and I spoke up in class and they made fun of me because they said I was, because I was stupid. They called me stupid, basically. And then the third gal said, I'm afraid of them laughing at me because I'm going to come across as being goody two-shoes and too smart. So you can see all three of them had a previous experience that they didn't want to run into again. So here's what I would recommend that you do in terms of mastering your mindset when it comes to fear. As Napoleon Hill said, fear is the most costly human emotion. I want you just to understand that the effect first that fear is having on you. As a chiropractor of 24 years, I remember in my first year as a clinician, I knew that the number one reason for health problems was mental health issues. They were driving the physical issues that people were coming in with, whether it was a disc issue, whether it was neck pain, back pain, you name it. And I didn't really know what to do because I did study psychology. I had a minor in psychology from the University of Toronto, but I didn't really know what to do. I thought, okay, I got to go back and maybe become a psychologist or psychiatrist. I didn't think there was anything else out there. Well, I started reading as much as I could in the personal development space, and I realized there's a lot of incredible tools out there. So what I was doing in my clinic is when a patient would come in, I would scan their spine. I would use thermal technology to scan the muscles that run along the vertebrae, the bones in your back, to pick up differences in temperature. And then I would treat a patient and then rescan, and we would see the impact that the physical treatment had. Okay. I was also using a piece of technology called Aortic Index at the time. I think it's now called iHeart. And what we do is you put a little clip on the tip of the finger here, and it would measure the stress around the aorta, around the heart. So what I was doing is I was measuring spinal stress through thermal scans, and I was measuring stress on the heart through this aortic index. And what I noticed is my first patient came in, and this is the first time that someone didn't want me to physically treat them. They just wanted to talk. So Tiffany just wanted to speak, and we did. And after I scanned her spine, it was a complete mess, but she said she just didn't want to have the treatment. When I talked to her, and I'll share with you what I talked to her about, and rescanned, everything normalized. The thermal scan normalized, the heart readings normalized. And that's when I realized I was onto something. And her story is so simple. She's divorced, and she said to me, I'm afraid of losing my son. This is when I realized that emotions are at the root of health problems, and fear specifically is probably the biggest culprit. And I said to her, okay, so tell me what's going on. She said, look, when I was married, my husband didn't want to take my son to see my sister and her family. But now that I'm divorced, he's taking him there. And so she feels like she's going to lose the connection to her son because her husband and her sister are developing a strong connection with him. And I didn't have any skills. All I knew was just a challenger perspective. And I said, so, I mean, why is this so bad? And, how could this be of use to you? And, I can't remember the exact things I said. It was just something along the lines of just trying to challenge her perspective. I rescanned and everything normalized. And that's when I realized that, wow, if I can figure out a way to get people's mind to work for them instead of against them, we can really move the needle when it comes to physical health issues and disease. But I realized soon after, 20 years later, that it's not just about physical health. It's about business. It's about personal relationships, professional relationships. It's anything that you can think of, any category of life you could think of. Relationship with yourself, relationship with others, relationship with the material world. You can move the needle in the right direction. So how do you move forward with this process? Here's what I would highly recommend that you do. First, realize what fear of the unknown paradigm, holding on to that paradigm, costs you. Remember, there's nothing you can do about it. You're always one step behind fear. And you're always going to be waiting to experience what you feel anxious about. And then you're going to, after the fact, in hindsight, realize what you're afraid of. So it's important that you park that model and just embrace this new model of fear of the known. Because remember, with the past, although you can't change it, you can change the impact it's having on you. And you're going to see how. Okay. So that's the first thing I want you to do. Next, I want you to take out a piece of paper or electronically capture this information. I want you to come up with what we call in the book, a fear inventory. Okay. I want you to make a list of every fear that you have right now. This is what I call conscious fears. So I'm afraid of swimming. I'm afraid of opening my own business. I'm afraid of conflict. I'm afraid of my son going to university. Whatever. Just make a list of your fears. Okay. Number 2, I would make a list of, and you can do this side by side, of a list of your unconscious fears. So your conscious fears are obvious, right? I'm afraid of swimming. You're afraid of swimming. I'm afraid of driving on the highway. It's there. You're conscious of it. But then I want you to make a list of what I call unconscious fears. Unconscious fears are fears that you have labeled something else. And what falls under these categories, this category of fears, is anything you would call a stress, a struggle, an issue, a challenge, or an obstacle, to name a few, okay? Any term that you would use is really code for fear. Because if you peel those labels away, what you're going to find is fear. I believe that fear sits at the center of every problem, stress, struggle, issue, challenge you have. That's the bad news. You may think of it that way. But the good news is, of course, that if fear sits at the center of every problem, it stands tall at the center of every solution if you know how to leverage it. Okay, so now you got this list. Conscious fears, unconscious fears that you've labeled as something else. Then what you want to do is prioritize the list. What's the most important fear? What's the number one fear that you need to work on and prioritize? Because that'll make the biggest difference in your life. See, if your top priority in life right now, if your number one value in life right now is to shift your business, then overcoming the fear of swimming may not be as important as overcoming the fear of networking or public speaking, right? So you want to figure out what is the vision you have, that top priority you have, your number one value in life, and then isolate the top priority, number one fear that connects to it so you can make the greatest forward progress. I have an issue with goal setting because it makes sense to set goals, right? It makes sense to have a vision, but realize that if you don't address the fears that are impacting the decisions and actions required to fulfill the goals, to meet the goals, and to fulfill the vision, then you're spinning your wheels, right? But if you, as Tim Ferriss says, if you, fear setting, I believe his talk that hit about 4 million is called "Why Fear Setting is More Important Than Goal Setting." So I don't use his fear setting process. I use a fear inventory, but it's kind of similar, and it's alluding to the fact that prioritizing fears over goals is the way to go. And that's my recommendation. Unless your goal is to overcome fear, you're probably not addressing the biggest and most important thing in your life. And that is the number one fear that if you overcame would help you achieve your number one top priority and number one value. Okay. So you got your fear inventory. You prioritized the number one fear. Now you want to go to the method. So what Fear Forward is basically proposing is that it's a 4-step method, right? And what we're saying is if you can get used to taking a fear and putting it through the method, go back to the inventory, take the next fear, put it through the method, you're literally going to take quantum giant steps forward in life instead of, limping your life, as Dr. John Demartini says it, and, taking baby steps. So what I want you to do is I want you to write down these 4 steps. Okay. Number 1 is I want you to formulate a fear-based statement. You want to, whether you took your conscious or unconscious fear, you need to have a specific fear-based statement that identifies and isolates exactly what that fear is. See, you might have a fear of a divorce, but the deeper fear is fear of being alone. You might have a fear of of not having a child, but the deeper fear is not having a child will lead to your husband breaking up with you. You might have a fear of having you are afraid of having a baby because of what that'll do to your physical body and how that'll impact your career, etc. So if there's a fire burning in the basement, you don't want to be spraying water at the smoke at the tip of Burj Khalifa or at the penthouse, right? So you want to identify what we call the basement fear. And that would be reflected in a very specific fear-based statement. If your fear is unconscious, right, then what you want to do is ask yourself, what am I afraid my stress would lead to? What am I afraid my issue would lead to? And then get deep into what that fear is, the deepest layer of that fear. Okay? Now that you have your fear-based statement, you want to establish your source incident, right? So F is formulate your fear-based statement. E is establish your source incident. Remember, every current fear you have is acquired, it's learned. So we got to go back and find out where it started so we can unlearn it. Okay? So your source incident, when you think of you're afraid of failing in business, your mind might go to, okay, there was a time in the past when I had to shut down a business. You may go to a time in the past when you witnessed your dad have to, shut down his business. This is what we call the difference between direct and indirect fears. So once you go back and you look at what are the possible source incidents, you may notice that some are direct incidences where you experienced it directly through your own eyes, or it's an indirect fear incident whereby you experienced it through the eyes of others. You read about it, watched a video, witnessed it firsthand, or heard about someone experiencing that. And that's why you're afraid of experiencing it yourself. Okay. So you might have a fear of swimming that came from a time when you nearly drowned. You may have a fear of swimming, which is a direct fear. You may have a fear of swimming because you witnessed someone nearly drown. That's an indirect fear. Okay. So we've established what our fear is. I'm afraid of the water and I'm afraid of drowning. You go to your establish your source incident. When I was 14, I almost drowned. I know a case of someone who was in her 80s that remembers when she was literally a teenager and she stepped on what she thought were leaves, but they gave way under her foot. She was actually stepping into a moving river. Okay, she didn't fall in, but that was enough to trigger her fear. Okay, I had one gentleman that had a fear of swimming. When we established his source incident, he remembers staying up late at 4 years old, staying up late, hiding behind the lazy boy and watching Jaws. And from then, he's never, ever swam. Okay? Now, the third step, so we've F, formulate your fear-based statement. E, establish your source incident. A, advantage find. Advantage finding basically requires you to go back to your fear, whether it's direct or indirect, to that source incident, and ask yourself, what was the advantage of experiencing exactly that? So when we took Jody, the lady who was having difficulty having a child after 10 years of trying, when we went back to her source incident, it's when she was 15 years old with her mom, and she was criticized by her mother. We went to what was the advantage of experiencing exactly that, the advantage of being criticized by her mom. She realized that, number one, she didn't care what her mom thought anymore. Number two, she had a vision of being independent. Number three, she left the house. Number four, I know some of you would call that disadvantage, but we're looking at the advantages through her eyes. Number four, she went and got a job. She had to be financially independent. She was depending on her parents before. And her dad was saying, sweetheart, if you're going to leave, and I know you don't want to talk to mom anymore, you got to at least let me support your funding or get a job. And he helped her. She got a job. She learned under some people that were really inspiring. She acquired incredible social skills. That's why she climbed the corporate ladder, worked for many large organizations, became the right-hand woman of many CEOs. She ended up traveling to Dubai, met her husband. She then opened her own business. You see how all that started and was triggered and catalyzed by that incident with her mom. So then you want to make sure that you've reached a point where you can see that event as no longer being negative, because any event, you want to capture this, any event that you label as being negative, that you judge as being negative, the brain will call that and label that an unwanted event. And at all costs will avoid that. You will do whatever it takes to avoid running in to anything that resembles yesterday, an unwanted part of yesterday. So what we did was we reframed it, and she no longer saw that event with her mom as a negative experience. She completed her perspective. She saw just as many advantages as disadvantages of experiencing that. And when she closed her eyes and I said, do you have any fear remaining, which is the final point? Okay, that's the last step. After you do the advantage finding, you want to ask yourself, is there any fear remaining? If there is a fear remaining, then you would go to another potential source incident, or what we call another memory, and apply the same process. With Jody, when she closed her eyes and said, is there any fear remaining? She said none, and she started crying. And she felt deep love and gratitude for that event. She appreciated it as it was, appreciated her mom as it was, appreciated her life as it was. Of course, her physiology normalized, and she was able to have a baby. Okay? So that's the process. Start with your inventory. Make a list of your fears, conscious and unconscious. Isolate the top fear, the number one fear that will make the greatest difference in your life specifically with what's top priority and high value for you, and work on that one. Put it through the fear forward process. Number one, formulate a fear-based statement. Identify exactly what that fear is. Get to the basement. Peel all the superficial layers away until you get to what is this fear really, really about. Establish the source incident. Identify exactly where this fear stems from. There may be multiple. And let me just go into this a bit. I didn't talk about the fact that if you're not sure which source incident to work with, you want to ask yourself, which one is the most psychologically active? And that's a term I made up because that's really a term for drugs. But you want to ask yourself, which incident is most alive in my mind? Psychologically active, physiologically active, alive in my body, and emotionally active. And so if you just think of all three of them combined, you just ask yourself, is it this source incident that's driving my fear, or this one? Right? Is it the time when my mom criticized me that's now leading me to be afraid of confrontation? Or is it the time when I was criticized by my boss at work? Right? And then with psychologically active, physiologically active, and emotionally active, you want to be able to determine which one is a higher threshold in terms of being more intense. Okay? Which one crosses the intensity threshold? For Jody, that was a single event. So she had one source incident, away you go. I've had gals that I've coached who have been physically manhandled in relationships, and they're like, there's so many times he hit me. Which one do I pick? I said, the time that stings most, the most intense memory. I remember this one gal said, it's when he hit me in front of my kids, or it's when he hit me in public. Okay. So if it was, you being beaten up when you were a kid, which time? Okay. So you want to figure out what is the most intense memory. That is the one you want to start with. Keep in mind, there may be one, or there may be multiple sources. Okay. Then, of course, you want to apply advantage finding to the first one, the highest priority source incident. And then when you're done, you want to go back and just check in with yourself and ask, is there any fear remaining? If it's softened, then you probably didn't go all the way with your advantage finding. If your mind jumped to another memory, then there's multiple source incidents. If that fear is completely gone, then what you want to do is go back to your fear inventory and isolate the next highest priority fear. That would move you in the right direction to the greatest degree with respect to your top priority or highest value in life. Okay, hope that makes perfect sense. I'm going to answer a few questions now. Okay. So I hear this question a lot, and that is, where does fear of the unknown come from? The most accurate answer is I have no bloody idea. But what I can tell you in terms of an educated guess would be some potentially Plato. I know it's been around for ages, but Plato in his allegory, The Cave, did allude to the fact that, the cave dwellers that didn't want to venture outside the cave and pursue enlightenment were perhaps afraid of the unknown. The reason why I don't think that holds water is because if they were facing the wall and they saw these shadows cast upon the wall that were monsters potentially, that is what they know. And so why would they, want to turn around and face them in HD and in color in real life? So it's the known that they were afraid of. There's other theories would be that potentially this came from cultures that were cannibalistic. And so as a human being, you'd be afraid of interacting with another culture because they could be cannibals. And I know that some French philosophers proposed this. The fear of public speaking, for example, it could be the fact that you don't know if they're going to kill you based on what you say. So that's why a lot of people are afraid to speak up. So that's probably where it originates. But I mean, who knows, right? It's been around for ages. And if you can't identify what you're afraid of, it's very easy to just relegate it to being afraid of the unknown. I mean, you don't know what you're afraid of. So it makes sense to just say it's fear of the unknown. So that's a very, very common question I hear. Okay, what do you recommend is the first step to organizing the fear setting process? Yeah, so I mean, like I said, the first thing I would do is just ask yourself, do I want to still hold and carry this fear of the unknown model with me under my, in my back pocket? Because if you do, it costs you. Remember, there's nothing you can do about fear of the unknown. You got to wait to show up, find out what you're afraid of, which means you're always living in fear, living around fear. But if you change the model and embrace fear of the known, then of course you can do something about the past. Change the past, but you can change the impact it's having on you by rewriting it. All we did with Jody is we changed her story. Her story went from my mom criticized me, it wrecked me, it hurt me, etc. And then she went to a place where she appreciated it because it came with blessings and lessons and opportunities and insights and new relationships that were formed and strengthened existing relationships, etc. So that's the first thing I would do. If you've already bought the idea that fear of the known is more of an empowering model, then your first step would be to come up with a fear inventory and isolate your conscious and unconscious fears. My battery's running a bit low here. Okay, let me get to the next one. Do you think most people have fear of failure? Well, that's a tricky one, because while I do believe that fear of failure is a very common fear, fear of success might be just as common. I mean, if you just look at it yourself and imagine what you're trying to achieve in life and ask yourself, okay, I have this exam next week. Am I afraid of failing? Yes. Am I afraid of succeeding? No. Okay. So that, that in terms of a competing fear, that's more of a fear of failure, right? But if it's like, okay, I might take my business to the next level, I might go global. And if that could radically transform your life, then you may be afraid of succeeding as much as failure or more so than failure, right? Whatever fear is going to radically transform your life and whatever fear is related to a previous incident that's more intense is going to be the fear that you fear the most. So sometimes it's fear of failure for some people. Sometimes it's fear of success. And sometimes it's mixed. It's a mix of both. Okay, what can you do in the moment when you feel fear? So look, first let me just tell you that you don't want to get rid of all your fears. Okay, you're never going to get rid of all your fears because the fears I'm proposing to get rid of are the fears that you acquired, the fears that you learned to be afraid of. But the inborn fears, such as fear of loud sounds, fear of predation, fear of fast approaching objects, you don't want to get rid of those fears. I mean, when somebody throws something at you, at your head, you want to duck. You want to be afraid. Okay, if you look down a cliff, you want to be afraid so you can back off. When you see a predator, you want to, run for the hills. Okay, climb a tree. So those make sense because they're self-preservation centric, right? You want to keep those fears alive unless it's directly involved in your work, right? Unless you are, climbing skyscrapers and you need to get over the fear of heights. Unless you're going to be around loud sounds, you want to get used to that. You're going to be working in a circus around lions, you want to soften the fear. You can soften them, but you'll never really eliminate them. Hello.
Dr. Udi, I want to help you because we are getting a lot of questions for your session. So I want to help you with the questions. Sarah, she's asking, can you share the fear formula, please? Are you answered? Is the fear learned and also attracted from the people?
So the question is, repeat it one more time.
Is fear learned and also attracted from the other people?
Okay. So yes, that's a great question. Yes, fear can be learned and acquired from other people. Yeah. But I want to just make a distinction, because you can learn to be afraid of, teachers in school that wear glasses because you had an experience in the past where a teacher at school that wore glasses, criticized you in front of the class, or quote, in your mind, humiliated you, and that's why you fear it. So that's a learned fear that came from a previous experience. Okay, but you can also acquire fears. I believe you call it attracted, but I believe what we're talking about is inheriting fears from other people. Yes, as a parent, you can take your son for a walk and then run into a dog, and if you as a parent are afraid of the dog, your child is going to pick up on your fear, because you're probably going to change your body language. You're probably going to move your child behind you to protect them. And that fear can be transmitted, inherited, or as you put it, attracted by the parent. We have something called ancestral fears, which are fears that are passed down from our ancestors, right? And these are the fears I was talking about, which are not learned necessarily. They're inborn, because you're born with it. You're born being afraid of lions and tigers and bears, because they're inherited from our ancestors. And being afraid is what allowed us to survive, right? Knowing that this is a predator that can hurt me is natural. I know in the animal world, which is interesting, that some animals, seals, for example, when they see a killer whale, they're not afraid of the killer whale. But then the mom or the dad seal has to tell them, get the hell out of here, because this thing can eat you. So again, there's this mix of inborn fears and acquired fears.
Okay, and the last question is, can we define anxious feeling originating from the fear thoughts?
Yes. So I made a distinction in the book between anxiety, fear, base fear, I called it, and panic attacks. It's really a fear spectrum, right? Like when fear is really mild and an event is a year away or some time away, it's not imminent, then you would feel anxious. But as you start approaching this event and it becomes more imminent, then it becomes a fear, a base fear. And then if you're like about to step on stage, or you're about to interact with someone who you're really afraid of, that's when it can become a full-blown panic attack.
Okay. And now we need to see who is the winner for your lucky draw.
So I'll just pick a random person here. Let's go with Sarah. I hope I say your name right. Sarah Hano.
So Sarah, congratulations. You are the lucky winner of the book from Dr. Udi. Can you tell us the name of the book?
Yes. It's called Fear Forward. It's called Fear Forward. Congratulations, Sarah. I hope it transforms your life. You know, when I started putting this book together, it was 1 year and 1 day after I coached Jody and helped her have a baby, along with her other doctors and healers that were part of the process. And I put in my mind, my goal was to get this book done in 1 year and 1 day after I coached her. But it was too challenging of a project. It took 1 year and 9 months. I hope it transforms your life. So congratulations. Thank you very much for participating.
Thank you so much, Dr. Udi. One more question. Just somebody put one more question now. There are any techniques that we can apply in the moment the feeling of fear is coming up?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I think I actually forgot to finalize that point. Yes, in the book, there's 8 tools that I give. The one tool I gave was repetition, right? Because if you're afraid of heights, you just keep doing it over and over again and you'll become more apt at doing that. adept at doing that. I know with public speaking, some people just speak often and it works. But what you want to do in the second that fear appears, what you could apply, for example, is a breathing technique. You could, apply box breathing, for example, or you could do the physiological side that Dr. Andrew Huberman speaks about in his podcast. Just to give you the box breathing, you may be aware of it. So let's say you get some news, you're at work, and you're not going to be able to deal with it until you get home. Just, close the door, find a place in your office or in your car, wherever, and breathe in the box fashion, which is take, let's just say, a 4-second inhale, 4-second hold, 4-second exhale, 4-second hold, and just repeat. It's a technique that's used by Navy SEALs to calm themselves down until you're ready to face the fear at its root by going back to its source incident. Hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much, Dr. Udi. I hope everyone that was not able to join will be able to download for sure. And please have an amazing day and stay tuned with us. And have a restful day, Dr. Udi. You got so much work to get ready for this event. And your session was really amazing. Thank you for the gift as well. And see you soon.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Have a nice day.